Has man set foot on every square mile of the United States? Alaska is pretty big and pretty remote. I'd say no. There is definitely still unexplored land in the U.S. New caves and grottos are discovered all the time. There's undoubtedly wide swaths of plains that have never been touched by human foot solely because there was no reason to go that specific direction. Side note, I've noticed several different commenters mention how parts of Mt. Everest are untouched. You guys do know that Mt. Everest is not located anywhere near the United States, right? Depends on how you define every square mile. If you are asking if there is any contiguous patch of land that is 1 square mile in area and no human has ever walked on it, then yes, absolutely. There are many. For example, inaccessible mountain ridges in the Sierra Nevada. Now if instead you mean if the whole country were divided into neat 1 by 1 square mile tiles, that's a little bit trickier to answer. We obviously have no clue how much the Native Americans or Paleolithic peoples explored. So maybe we can limit it to recent history. If you're talking about the tiles method, I would guess there probably exist a handful of tiles that have never been walked on by modern-day Americans. One place this is likely is the largest wilderness reserve in America, the River of No Return in Idaho. There are large sections of this wilderness that have no road access and no trails. Continental U.S. would include the contiguous states and Alaska. With that in mind, Alaska absolutely has not been had every square mile touched. The national parks in the state, Gates of the Arctic, Wrangell Street Elias, are completely undeveloped and just vast, empty land. Go north of Fairbanks and you're in the subarctic tundra, which is nothing but wilderness in every direction. There are few developed trails, very few roads, and that's not even half of the state's total area. Hell, I'd wager that even populated states like California have not had every square mile touched. Northern California has the dense redwoods, numerous remote mountain ranges, and plenty of places that have little, if any, population. Considering humans have been here for at least tens of thousands of years, I would say it's safe to assume pretty much every bit has been touched. No, it's a great question, but we haven't explored every square mile of the continental United States yet. I'm sure there's parts of the Midwest and definitely sections of desert that haven't been fully explored yet. Most of our discoveries in areas like that are probably from aircrafts and/or satellite imagery. Pre-colonization, I'm sure people had explored a good amount of the country, but more remote and/or inhospitable places were likely avoided. Every square mile has almost certainly been touched by man, not necessarily in our lifetime. Ancient indigenous people wandered everywhere searching for game and natural resources. Rocky Mountains in Colorado. I would guess there are square miles that are not reachable, passable. Yes, people climb to the top of Long's Peak regularly, but I would guess there are other parts of various peaks that cannot be scaled. My 6-year-old daughter once asked if there were any islands that hadn't been discovered yet. I'd rate your daughter's question as slightly more reasonable. Do you mean above ground? 'Cause I'm sure there's an unexplored cave. The human race is old. Like really old. Likely yes. Never set foot? If there are, they would be very few. Others have noted logging and mining, but also during the Depression programs like the WPA, CCC, and TVA built much of the infrastructure in federal lands and parks, cut fire roads, etc. Add in laying of telegraph cables and railroads. 2 centuries of various commercial AMD government surveys. Huge swaths of land out west in remote locations dedicated to military activities. Currently or at some point in the past there isn't much left. However, their USA is really, really big, and there are huge spaces where another person may not have ventured for a very long time, or are rarely visited. Those inaccessible peaks others mentioned? No such thing. My cousin was a professional skier and the ski magazines used to fly him to these inaccessible peaks by helicopter and drop him to ski down them. He was very, very good and made a really good living from it. He was also fearless and about half nuts, as you need to be to do that kind of thing. There's absolutely no way. I'm going to say no. I feel like we're close. But there's still a whole slew of wilderness and miles of caves that haven't been searched. The Native Americans have been on this continent for 20,000 years or more. They populated this entire continent on foot. And remember that something like 90% of them died from smallpox before the European settlers ever made their way west. Yes. I guarantee you that at some point there has been a human being on every square mile. Absolutely. My guess is some parts of northwest forests, southwest deserts, and definitely Alaska have untouched land. I recently drove from the Midwest to Seattle, so I can speak for it personally that there is a crazy amount of remote land in the Northwest. Also, northern Idaho is extremely remote. We haven't even surveyed all of Alaska yet, so very much no. No way. Oh no, definitely not. We have a lot of wilderness and empty spaces. I was hiking some beach cliff terrain in eastern Canada a few years back and scaled down the side of one of the smaller cliffs to the pebbled beach below. There was a small alcove of caves that typically are covered by water most of the year, and this was in the late winter when the tide was low. I made my way into the larger cave below the cliff and thought to myself that no one had ever been here before because I was in such a remote area. That's when I saw an odd formation of rocks against the wall of the cave that looked stacked and something wedged underneath. So I pulled the rocks off and found an old ammo canister. I opened it. Inside was wax-coated cloth that had a journal inside wrapped up in it, a rusted kazoo, a compass, and a pencil. Inside the journal were a few notes from very different handwriting styles and dated as far back as the 1920s. So I wrote down a few notes, dated it myself, and returned it all back into place to continue the prophecy.
If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. Epic Ericast is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.